Part 1. The Stolen Star. A single sheet of old paper can easily destroy a powerful hero. I always believed my father was a living god of words. His fantasy books sold millions of copies around the world. People loved his magical stories. Now, I finally know the terrible truth. My name is Clara. I am a very successful lawyer in a big city. My father, Thomas, was my greatest inspiration. When he grew old and tired, I decided to help him. I went to his large, quiet house to clean his dusty study for a museum exhibition. The study smelled like old books and sweet pipe tobacco. I carefully organized his famous awards on the wooden shelves. I felt incredibly proud of his amazing legacy. I opened a heavy, bottom drawer of his desk. I found a hidden, locked metal box inside. I used a small tool to break the simple lock. The box opened with a loud crack. Inside, I found a thick stack of typed papers. The pages were yellow and very old. I picked up the first page and began to read the typed words. My heart suddenly skipped a heavy beat. The story on the page was incredibly familiar. It described a brave young girl fighting a dark shadow monster. I recognized the names of the magical places. I knew every single detail of the beautiful, magical forest perfectly. I dropped the paper onto the desk. These were not his original ideas. These were my stories. I wrote these exact adventures in my secret childhood diaries. I lost those diaries many years ago. I thought I had simply misplaced them during a move. I picked up another page, my hands shaking violently. The words were copied exactly from my childhood memories. My father had stolen my private thoughts. He took my childish dreams and turned them into his famous, million-dollar fantasy empire. He built his entire career on my imagination. I checked the faded date stamped on the top of the typed pages. The date was from 20 years ago. It was exactly 1 year before he published his very first successful book. The evidence was completely undeniable. The timeline proved his terrible, dark crime. A cold, burning anger filled my chest. The great Thomas was nothing but a cheap fraud. He was a thief who stole from his own little girl. He exploited my innocent mind to gain wealth and worldwide fame. My perfect father was a complete lie. I stared at the awards on the shelf. They looked ugly and fake to me now. I felt completely betrayed by the person I loved most. He took the brightest star from my childhood sky and sold it for money. The illusion of my father was dead. I gathered the typed pages carefully. I put them into my leather briefcase. I was not a weak little girl anymore. I was a powerful, angry lawyer. I prepared to confront the famous writer. I was going to make him pay for stealing my life. Part 2. The Declaration of War. I drove to my father's house the next morning. The sky was dark and heavy with gray clouds. I walked into his study and threw the typed pages directly onto his wooden desk. The papers scattered everywhere. I demanded a clear, honest explanation immediately. Thomas looked at the old pages. He did not look surprised or shocked. His face remained completely calm and unreadable. He slowly took off his reading glasses. He looked at me with tired, deeply sad eyes. But he did not offer a single word of apology. Burn them and forget this ever happened. His cold voice offered no explanation. You simply do not understand the truth of these pages, Clara. His arrogant dismissal felt like a sharp knife in my chest. He was treating me like a foolish, confused child. My anger exploded into a violent storm. I screamed at him, tears of pure betrayal falling down my face. I accused him of being a shameless thief. I told him he exploited my innocent childhood to build his fake, wealthy empire. I wanted him to feel my pain. Thomas simply looked away. He stared out the large window at the quiet garden. "Do whatever you must do, Clara." His voice was completely empty of emotion. "I will not stop you." His absolute refusal to apologize or explain made my blood boil with intense hatred. I grabbed the papers and stormed out of his house. I drove straight to my law firm. I called the biggest newspapers in the city. I organized a massive press conference. I was ready to destroy the famous, beloved author completely. I wanted the whole world to know. The cameras flashed brightly in the crowded room. I held up the old, typed pages for everyone to see. I officially declared war on my own father. I announced a massive federal lawsuit against him. I sued him for copyright infringement, extreme emotional damage, and fraud. The news spread across the globe in a few hours. The internet exploded with shock and anger. Fans burned his famous books in the streets. Talk show hosts called him a monster who stole from his own daughter. His perfect, shining reputation was ruined instantly. My legal team prepared a brutal case. We had undeniable proof. The dates on the typed pages perfectly matched my childhood timeline. The court accepted our lawsuit immediately. We demanded all the royalty money he had ever earned. We wanted to leave him with absolutely nothing. I sat in my dark office, looking at the city lights. I felt a cold, sharp sense of victory. I was finally taking back my stolen stories. I was tearing down the fake king from his stolen throne. But the victory felt strangely heavy and bitter. I expected my father to fight back. I expected him to hire expensive lawyers to destroy my claims. I waited for his aggressive legal response. But the response never came. The famous writer remained completely silent, waiting for the trial to begin. Part 3. The Silent Trial. The federal courthouse was surrounded by hundreds of reporters and angry fans. I wore my best dark suit. I walked proudly up the stone steps. The world was watching the great Thomas fall from grace. I felt completely confident. My legal evidence was absolutely perfect and undeniable. I sat at the plaintiff's table, organizing my documents. The heavy wooden doors opened. Thomas walked into the courtroom slowly. He looked incredibly old, weak, and tired. He wore a simple, cheap suit. He did not look like a wealthy, famous author anymore. He looked defeated. I expected to see a team of aggressive, expensive defense lawyers sitting next to him. But the chairs beside my father were completely empty. He sat at the defense table entirely alone. The judge entered the room, looking very confused by the empty defense table. "Where is your legal counsel, Thomas?" the judge asked with a stern, loud voice. "The trial cannot proceed properly without your lawyers." The entire courtroom fell perfectly silent. Everyone leaned forward, waiting for the famous writer to speak. The tension in the air was incredibly heavy. "I fired them all this morning, Your Honor." Thomas spoke clearly, his voice echoing in the large room. "I do not need a defense." The judge frowned, warning him about the severe legal consequences. The financial penalties would be absolutely massive and completely ruinous. "I fully understand the consequences," Thomas replied calmly. He stood up and looked directly at the judge. "I plead guilty to every single charge. I admit to stealing my daughter's stories. I claim 100% responsibility for this terrible, unforgivable crime." The courtroom erupted into loud gasps and chaotic whispers. The reporters wrote frantically in their notebooks. I stared at my father in pure, absolute shock. He did not fight. He did not offer a single excuse. He just surrendered completely on the very first day. The judge banged his wooden gavel to silence the noisy room. "Do you accept the financial demands of the plaintiff?" the judge asked, still looking surprised. "Yes, Your Honor." Thomas nodded slowly. "I will surrender all my wealth, my properties, and my future publishing rights to Clara." It was a total, unconditional surrender. The trial ended before it even truly began. The judge ruled in my favor immediately. Thomas was legally banned from ever publishing a book again. He was ordered to pay me millions of dollars in damages. He was completely bankrupt. As the guards escorted him out of the courtroom, Thomas stopped for a brief second. He looked at me across the crowded room. There was no anger in his tired eyes. There was only a deep, profound sadness. He smiled a very small, heartbreaking smile and then walked away. I won the biggest case of my career. I destroyed my father and took back my stolen stories. The reporters outside cheered my name loudly. But as I walked to my car, I felt a strange, cold emptiness in my chest. The easy victory felt incredibly wrong. Part 4. The Hollow Victory. 5 years passed since the famous, shocking trial. I became incredibly wealthy. The royalty checks from the fantasy books arrived in my bank account every single month. I bought a luxury apartment and lived a very comfortable life. But the money always felt like dirty cold ash. I never spoke to Thomas again. He completely disappeared from the public eye. The newspapers forgot about him. I tried to focus on my successful law firm and my young daughter. I tried to convince myself that I did the right, honorable thing. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, my office phone rang loudly. It was a call from a small, public hospital in a very poor part of the city. A tired nurse spoke quietly on the line. She told me that Thomas had just passed away from severe heart failure. My heart completely stopped. The man I hated for 5 years was dead. He died completely alone in a cheap, dirty hospital bed. He had no friends, no money, and no family by his side. A sudden, heavy wave of confusing sorrow washed over my entire body. I drove to his final address to collect his belongings. It was a tiny, freezing apartment in a dangerous neighborhood. The paint was peeling off the walls. He owned almost nothing. Just a small bed, a cheap wooden table, and a few old, worn-out clothes. The great, million-dollar author lived his final years in absolute, crushing poverty. I stood in the middle of the empty room, crying silent tears. I did this to him. I pushed him into this dark, lonely corner. The victory I won 5 years ago felt completely hollow and cruel. A few days later, a strange lawyer visited my office. He was a quiet, older man. He handed me a simple, white envelope. "This is your father's final will, Clara," the lawyer said softly. "He had no money left to give you, but he left you one last item." I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a small, rusty metal key. A short, handwritten note was folded around it. The handwriting was messy and weak. It is finally time for you to read the originals. The note said simply, "Forgive me, my sweet Clara." The key belonged to a high-security safe deposit box at a private bank downtown. My mind raced with new, terrifying questions. What originals was he talking about? I already had the typed pages from his study. What secret was he hiding in a bank vault? I canceled all my afternoon meetings immediately. I grabbed my coat and rushed to the bank. The cold, rusty key felt heavy in my pocket. I was about to open a door to the past. I was about to discover the final, hidden truth of my father's ruined life. Part 5. The Wooden Box. The bank manager led me down into the deep, quiet, underground vault. The air was incredibly cold and smelled like old metal. We walked past rows of shiny steel boxes. He stopped in front of a small door and inserted his master key. I used my rusty key to open it. I pulled out a long, heavy metal container. The manager left me alone in a small, private viewing room. I sat at a glass table, staring at the cold box. My hands shook violently as I slowly opened the heavy metal lid. Inside the container was an old, beautiful wooden box. It was covered in deep scratches and smelled like strong cedar wood. I carefully lifted the wooden lid. Inside, there were no typed pages. There were no clean, organized manuscripts. There was only a stack of very old, ruined notebooks. The notebooks were bound in cheap, black leather. They were covered in dust and dark stains. I reached out and touched the fragile covers. These were not the typed copies I found in his study 5 years ago. These were my actual, physical, handwritten childhood diaries. I pulled the first notebook out of the box. I opened it to the very first page. I expected to see my innocent, childish handwriting telling stories about brave knights and magical forests. But the page was completely different. The sight made my blood turn to freezing ice. The handwriting was not neat or innocent. It was chaotic, wild, and incredibly aggressive. The words were written in thick, dark red ink. The letters were sharp and angry, pressing so hard they almost tore the thin paper. This did not look like a fantasy story at all. I turned the page slowly. A terrifying, detailed drawing covered the entire sheet of paper. It was not a drawing of a magical dragon. It was a crude, violent sketch of a human body being chopped into small, bloody pieces with a heavy axe. My breath caught sharply in my throat. I flipped through more pages quickly. Every single page was filled with horrific, disturbing images and violent, angry words. There were lists of names crossed out with red ink. There were detailed maps of buildings with red X marks everywhere. This was not a fairy tale. This was a nightmare trapped on paper. I felt a sudden, massive wave of nausea hit my stomach. I recognized the messy, violent handwriting perfectly. It was definitely my own writing. But I had absolutely no memory of writing these terrible, horrific things. "What is this?" I whispered to the empty room. My hands trembled as I picked up the second notebook. The dark, terrifying reality of my forgotten childhood was slowly waking up from a deep sleep. The wooden box did not hold magic. It held pure, absolute madness. Part 6. The Demon's Mind. I forced myself to read the frantic, red words in the black notebook. The terrible truth hit me like a violent physical blow. I recognized the names on the pages. The evil Snake King from the famous fantasy books was actually Mr. Harrison, my old high school math teacher. The dark swamp of death described in the novels was not a magical place. The drawing in the diary was a perfect, detailed architectural map of my old high school cafeteria. The red X marks showed the exact locations of the exits and the heavy doors. The notebooks were not fantasy stories. They were a detailed, systematic plan for a massive school massacre. The heroic battles in the books were actually graphic descriptions of how I planned to torture and murder my classmates and teachers. The horror was absolutely overwhelming. I dropped the notebook onto the glass table. I covered my mouth to stop a scream. When I was 14 years old, I was not a creative storyteller. I was severely, dangerously mentally ill. I suffered from violent schizophrenia and deep psychotic delusions. I was a monster. The million-dollar fantasy series that my father published was never a fairy tale. It was the terrifying manifesto of a teenage killer. He took the names of my intended victims and changed them into magical creatures. He changed my violent murder plots into heroic quests to save the world. He did not steal a beautiful story to make money. He stole a horrific, bloody nightmare. He took the sick, dangerous thoughts of a psychotic child and hid them from the world. He transformed my absolute darkness into a beautiful, shining light for millions of readers. I realized the massive depth of my own forgotten insanity. My mind had completely blocked these memories to protect itself. I remembered being a quiet, creative girl. I completely forgot the dark voices, the violent urges, and the terrifying plans I wrote in the dark of the night. If anyone else had found these diaries 20 years ago, my life would have been instantly destroyed. The police would have arrested me. I would have been locked in a cold, dark cell in a maximum security mental hospital forever. I would never have become a successful lawyer. My father found the diaries first. He saw the terrifying demon growing inside his little girl's mind. He did not run away in fear. He did not call the police. He sat down at his typewriter and started to rewrite my entire destiny, word by careful word. Part 7. The Pen of Redemption. I dug deeper into the wooden box. Beneath the horrific, violent diaries, I found a thick, sealed medical folder. I opened it with shaking hands. The documents inside were official psychiatric evaluations from 20 years ago. The harsh, medical truth was finally exposed in black and white. The doctors diagnosed me with severe, violent paranoid schizophrenia. The medical recommendation was clear and terrifying. The chief psychiatrist strongly advised that I be permanently committed to a high-security mental institution. They believed I was a massive, uncontrollable danger to society and myself. But at the bottom of the form, there was a signature. Thomas had explicitly refused the doctor's orders. He signed a legal document claiming full, absolute responsibility for my care. He promised to isolate me at home and monitor me 24 hours a day. He refused to lock me away. Next to the medical files, I found my father's personal editing journals. I opened them and saw his beautiful, steady handwriting. I saw how he carefully analyzed my violent, bloody sentences. He crossed out the horrific words and replaced them with magic, hope, and courage. He took my psychotic desire to hurt my math teacher and turned it into a heroic battle against a fictional snake monster. He took my sick plans for a school massacre and transformed them into a magical quest to save a dying kingdom. He completely rewrote my soul. He spent countless sleepless nights sitting at his desk. He absorbed all my toxic, dark madness into his own mind. He used his incredible talent to filter the poison out of my words. He created the fantasy novels not for money, but as a desperate, loving therapy for his sick child. He published the books to show me that my mind could create beauty instead of death. He used the stories to slowly guide me back to reality. He paid for the best secret doctors and expensive treatments with the book money. He slowly, painfully cured my broken brain. He literally wrote me back into a normal human being. The fantasy series was a massive, protective shield built entirely out of a father's unconditional love. He turned a potential murderer into a successful, healthy woman. He was not a thief. He was the greatest savior in the world. I held his editing journal against my chest, crying loud, heavy tears. The weight of his massive sacrifice crushed my heart. He took the darkest, ugliest parts of me and turned them into art. He carried my heavy, dangerous secrets alone for 20 years so I could fly free. Part 8. The Awakened Memories. As I cried in the quiet bank vault, a sudden, sharp pain hit my head. The heavy, locked doors in my mind finally broke open. The repressed memories flooded back with terrifying, crystal-clear intensity. I suddenly remembered a dark, rainy night from exactly 20 years ago. I remembered standing in the dark hallway outside my father's bedroom. I was 14 years old. My mind was filled with chaotic, screaming voices telling me to do terrible things. I was holding a long, sharp kitchen knife in my shaking hands. I was completely lost in the dark madness. The bedroom door opened. Thomas stepped into the hallway. He saw me holding the deadly knife. He did not scream. He did not run away or call the police. He looked at my terrified, sick eyes with absolute, unwavering love. He slowly walked toward the sharp blade. He ignored the danger completely. He wrapped his strong arms around my shaking body. He hugged me tightly against his chest. I dropped the knife onto the wooden floor and collapsed into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably. The dark voices in my head suddenly went completely quiet. "I will help you, Clara," he whispered softly, kissing the top of my head. "I will take all these dark stories away. I promise I will carry them far away where they can never hurt you again. You are safe now. I am here." The memory faded, leaving me gasping for air in the bank vault. He kept his promise perfectly. He took the dark stories and locked them away. He typed clean, edited copies of the diaries to keep in his study. He intentionally created a fake trail of evidence. He registered the copyright using the edited, typed pages. He knew that one day, my healthy mind might find the typed pages. He preferred that I believe he was a simple, greedy plagiarist. It was much safer for me to hate him as a thief than to remember the truth. He wanted to ensure that I never found the violent, bloody originals by accident. He locked the real monster in this underground vault, hiding the key until after his death. He designed the perfect illusion to protect my fragile, recovered mind from my own horrific past. Every single action he took was designed to protect my future. He accepted my hatred willingly. He let me scream at him and call him a monster, knowing all along that he had saved me from becoming one. His silence was the loudest declaration of love I had ever heard. Part 9. The Verdict of Truth. The final, most devastating truth suddenly exploded in my mind. I thought about the famous trial 5 years ago. I thought about the day he fired his lawyers and pleaded guilty to every single charge. The super twist of his ultimate sacrifice finally became completely clear to me. If Thomas had fought the lawsuit, the legal process would have been incredibly brutal. A federal trial would demand a massive investigation into the origins of the books. Expert lawyers would demand to see all original notes, early drafts, and handwritten source materials. The court would leave no stone unturned. If he defended himself, the court order would have forced him to open this exact bank vault. The lawyers would have discovered the bloody, handwritten diaries. The entire world, the media, and the legal system would have seen the violent, psychotic murder plans of a 14-year-old girl. The truth would have been exposed on national television. My prestigious law firm would have fired me immediately. The police might have reopened cold cases. My daughter would be known as the child of a psychopath. My entire, beautiful, successful life would have been instantly, permanently destroyed. Thomas realized this the moment I filed the lawsuit. He knew the only way to stop the legal investigation was to surrender immediately. He fired his lawyers to prevent them from searching for the truth. He pleaded guilty to stop the discovery process completely and instantly seal the records. He did not plead guilty because he was afraid or guilty of theft. He accepted the title of a despicable thief. He allowed the world to hate him and burn his books. He accepted total financial ruin and public humiliation. He did it all to build an unbreakable legal wall around my secret. He let me condemn him in front of the entire world. He used his own public destruction as a massive steel shield to protect my career and my family. He went to a poor, lonely grave knowing he was a hero, even though the world thought he was trash. I fell to my knees on the cold floor of the vault, screaming in absolute, agonizing pain. The guilt was completely unbearable. I destroyed the greatest, most selfless man I had ever known. I punished him for the greatest act of love a parent could ever perform. Part 10. Prisoner of the Light. I gathered the dark, violent notebooks and placed them back into the wooden box. I left the bank and drove back to my large, expensive house. The royalty money in my bank account felt heavier than ever. It was blood money paid by a father's ultimate, total sacrifice. I carried the wooden box into my quiet living room. I sat in front of the large stone fireplace. I lit a small fire, watching the bright flames dance in the dark room. I wanted to call the newspapers. I wanted to tell the whole world the truth about Thomas. I wanted to clear his name and restore his beautiful legacy. I wanted everyone to know he was a saint, not a thief. But as I reached for my phone, I heard a soft, happy laugh from the hallway. My young daughter ran into the room, smiling brightly. I looked at her innocent, beautiful face. The haunting, terrible reality crashed over me. If I clear his name, I must expose the diaries. I must tell the world that I was a psychotic monster. The stigma and the fear would follow my daughter for the rest of her life. She would be judged by my dark past. Her future would be ruined by the truth. Thomas sacrificed his entire life to ensure she could live in the light. If I tell the truth now, I will destroy the very thing he died to protect. I cannot be selfish. I looked at the original diaries one last time. I threw the dark, violent notebooks directly into the hot flames. I watched the thick, red ink burn and turn into gray ash. I watched my father's greatest secret disappear forever into the smoke. I burned the truth completely. I hugged my daughter tightly, crying silent, heavy tears into her hair. I must continue to live the lie. I must accept the terrible guilt of destroying him. I must forever be known as the girl whose father stole her stories. It is my permanent punishment. I am a prisoner of the beautiful light he bought for me. I will live every day trying to be a good person, carrying the invisible weight of his massive love. The stolen diaries are finally gone, but the ghost of my father's ultimate sacrifice will haunt my soul forever.